Welcome everyone to today's webinar. While we wait for more people to join us, I thought we could all go over what to expect and get to know each other a little bit. A quick note, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all of you after the event. This is a 1-hour webinar. We will be doing quick introductions and asking questions to our panelists for the first 45 minutes. We will reserve the last 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. If you have a question anytime between now and the end of the webinar, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to enter your question. You can select to ask anonymously if you'd like. If you see a question you want answered, you can upvote those questions. We will be doing our best to address as many questions as we can. But if we don't get to all your questions live, we will answer all of them in a follow-up email along with the webinar recording. While we continue our housekeeping and introductions, I invite all of you to introduce yourselves in the chat and participate in 2 poll questions. If you're comfortable, please tell us your first name, your organization or affiliation, and what brought you to this discussion today. We are also going to pop the first of 2 polls up for you to answer. I see many familiar names here, but for those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, hello and welcome. My name is Olga Flores, and I've been with the Village Family Services for 8 years. I currently serve as the Senior Director of Housing Services, where I oversee 12 youth-focused programs, including our role as the lead agency for the Youth Coordinated Entry System, or YCES, in the San Fernando Valley. For those unfamiliar, YCES connects people to housing, shelter, and supportive services through a fair, streamlined, and youth-centered process. At the Village, we're proud to lead YCES for Service Planning Area 2, helping ensure that every young person who reaches out, no matter how or where, has a clear path to safety and support. Now, I would like to invite the Village's Executive Vice President, Alejandro Soria, to say a few words.
Hi, nice to see everyone here. Hi, thank you, Olga. Hello, everyone. My name is Alejandro Soria. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Village Family Services. I began my work here over 10 years ago in 2014. If you don't know about the Village Family Services, I'm so glad you're here to get to know us and our work. The Village was founded in 1997 to address the urgent need for bilingual resources and support for foster children in San Fernando Valley, especially Latino youth. Over the last 27 years, the organization has expanded and grown, serving unhoused youth, unaccompanied minors, and much more. Thanks to the help of our generous public and private funders, we have been able to reach over 24,000 young people and their families since our founding. We expect an informative hour together. Thank you so much for the incredible panelists for being here, and thank you all of you for joining us for this important conversation. Finally, I would like to thank our sponsors, Arthur Gallagher and the Valley Community Healthcare. Thank you for supporting our work. As we look ahead to the future of funding for organizations like the Village Family Services, we wanted to start this conversation with a brief message from someone who's been a national leader in the transforming child welfare and youth homelessness systems. Sixto Cancel is a CEO of Think of Us and a powerful advocate for the redesigning support systems with lived experience at the center. He's here to share a few reflections and what this moment calls for. Gracias, and thank you all.
Thank you so much for having me, Alejandro and team. It is such an honor and blessing to be with all of you today. And I wanted just to share a little bit about where is it that I see the national landscape of foster care and homelessness services, and where do we think things are going? And so a little bit about me. My name is Sixto Cancel again, founder and CEO of Think of Us. And Think of Us is a nonprofit that is focused that is focused on systems reform and child welfare. And the way that we support system reform is by engaging those with lived experience in sparking, supporting, or actually co-driving different systems change initiatives. I want to talk about the fact that we are probably in one of the most unique times, as folks know. It's unique for several different reasons. Over the last 10 years, what we've seen is that the child welfare system went from a system that said we have to ensure folks are focused on reunification, adoption, and fostering. And during the Obama administration, we saw that there was a calling to make sure that young people have healthy development and be able to actually participate in different activities such as after school programs. And what we saw there was literally the law change. And then we had the next administration that went and passed Family First. And that administration really called the child welfare system to say, if we can prevent children from coming in, how do we do that? And then the next administration focused in on kinship, right? If we do have to bring children into the child welfare system, how might we actually ensure that they are with someone that they know or a family member? What this does for me as I look at it is it really sets the foundation for a new potential system that is rooted in keeping families together by doing that preventative work, or if you do have to come in, placing with the child. But we have to make healing and development real. And that's what excites me about organizations, excuse me, organizations like Village Family Services, because it is going to be on the community-based organizations, doorstep to actually navigate this time. So although there's excitement about how things have shifted, for me, when I look at the landscape, I also know that we're heading for some challenging times. There's been some shifts at the federal level, and yet I love to see the fact that organizations like this one are stepping up and saying, how do we do more and how do we meet the moment? And so when systems fail, it is nonprofits that step in. And there are those of us like our organization who will tinker with policy, who will advocate on that front. But every single day, there are families and young people who are waking up who are going to need to pick up the phone and have someone on that other end supporting them. Those youth, those caregivers are relying on organizations like this one to be able to pick up that phone. So to me, it was important to say, look, we're living in probably one of the most interesting time because you have this convergence of really great things around policy and regulation that has happened for the last 10 years. And all that implementation is occurring right now. But we also know it's a very interesting time because a lot of the programs that were federally funded have potentially shift a lot. And so the opportunity and the gap at the same time is going to be for organizations like this one to step in. And I'm excited to support. I'm asking all of my friends and folks to lean into supporting folks who are going to be at the front lines of answering the phone call for all of our young people and our caregivers. So I just thank you all for having me. Thank you all for sharing, let me share that little bit there.
Thank you so much for joining us, Sixto, and your powerful words. Now I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. Joining me, we have Justin Lee, the Senior Director of Strategic Consulting of Los Angeles County at Casey Family Programs, where he helps lead efforts to transform child welfare systems into those that are prevention-focused, community-led, and rooted in lived experience. His work spans public-private partnerships, policy design, and system-level strategy. The Village has had the pleasure of working with Justin through Pritzker Foster Care Initiative and the Rainbow Rescue Resource Network. All participating this afternoon is Kimberly Roberts. Kimberly is the Chief Programs Officer at LA Family Housing, one of the region's leading providers of housing and supportive services for people experiencing homelessness. With over 2 decades of experience in social services, Kimberly brings a deep understanding of trauma-informed care, youth engagement, and program design rooted in dignity and equity. We are also pleased to welcome Amy Perkins. the Senior Housing and Homeless Deputy of LA County Supervisor Lindsey Horvath, a longtime champion for housing justice, LGBTQ+ rights, and youth empowerment. Amy has been a key leader in the county's efforts to restore critical funding, like Measure A, and expand services for unhoused youth. She brings a policy lens informed by equity, collaboration, and a deep commitment to systems change. Finally, I'm excited to introduce our youth panelist, Yanni Abed, who brings a powerful story of resilience and determination. In late 2023, she experienced homelessness and was connected to the Chatsworth Transitional Housing Program with the Village Family Services. Within months, she secured housing, completed her surgical technician training, passed her state exam, and is now working towards complete self-sufficiency. Now, I'm excited to officially welcome our panelists to the conversation. As I ask them the first question, please answer the poll question that you will see pop up on your screen. We want this webinar to be a valuable opportunity for all to learn something new, and your participation will keep this webinar fun and engaging. My first question is for Kimberly and Amy. The recent restoration of Measure A funding was a huge win for transitioned age youth in LA County. From your vantage point at LA Family Housing and Supervisor Horvath's office, what does that kind of investment actually look like in practice? And what happens when that funding runs out? And for those of you who responded to our poll, the answer is 5.6 million in funding specifically for TAY services.
If I can say something first, thanks so much, Olga, and thank you for having me. Oh yeah, most people put that. I think something that has to be said that's so incredibly important is that this money was funded because of the voices of youth who came together to advocate for it to be restored. So there were a lot of cuts this year. So I think it's important to call out Measure A, of course, is a 1/2 cent sales tax. Measure H was a 1/4 cent. Well, that money for homeless services that we're getting in Measure A is still under that 1/4 cent. And we have a lot of increased expenses, full utilization of the time limited subsidies, increased payment on the interim housing bed rate, increasing ICMS numbers. So as we have more units of permanent supportive housing, we have to fund intensive case management services for those. So those amounts of investments go up every year, but the money we get from that 1/4 cent is pretty capped out. Just as an aside, we can always talk about it another time, that other 1/4 cent will go to fund La Casa, state-funded agency that's going to build more housing. But just back to your question, and Kim, you can talk more to the substance, but that money would not have been restored were it not for the youth who came out. And I want to point out a couple things they did well because it's so important for advocacy. Number one, they very wisely coordinated. And so they had, when they would come speak to the board or they came to the homeless deputies, and some of these youth may be on this call, they would start with like a uniform statement, and then they'd go into some sort of personal story. It didn't have to be any super personal, but they didn't just read off of like a uniform statement. They were all personalized. And something else they did really well is they were very specific in the ask that they made. So it wasn't vague in restoring this funding. And then the last thing I'll say is they came out early. So the moment they knew that these conversations were going to happen, we had youth at the meetings. And so we had some other people advocate for their cut funding, and they came a little later in the process. And so they didn't see their funding restored. But the youth told us that this system worked for you. And you said, so please fund this for us. The board heard it, and they restored most of the funding. The supervisor wanted a little bit more, about $1.5 million more, but we were really grateful to get the 5.6. Kim.
Yeah. So sorry about that. Thank you so much for having me today. I did want to echo what Amy is saying, and that the youth voice is critical in the ability for our system to be funded in the way that would keep us whole going into next year. What does this mean? It means that the services on the ground will continue to serve this population specifically. We know that the needs of youth is just different than the needs of families, and it's different than the needs of single adults. And all of those populations have critical kind of funding needs and funding gaps, but the ability for those dollars to go directly to this population, ensuring that we have set aside dedicated resources that are championed by the youth that are in our system and help to guide and shape the way those services are delivered. Without these dollars, what would that mean? It would mean that we would see more youth homelessness. We would see more street homelessness. And we know that the recidivism rate and the reality that people who are experiencing homelessness when they're 18, 19, and 20 years old, if the support and services are not there to really assist them to get permanently housed long-term, we will see them fall into our family system and our adult system. And so it's really critical that these dollars are there to ensure and try our best to prevent folks from experiencing chronic homelessness when they're 18 or 19 years old.
Thank you both, Amy and Kimberly. It was really powerful to see how many youth and how many youth providers showed up to this meeting to advocate for these changes. The next question is for Justin and Amy. We all know the importance of creating of centered living experience and community co-creation and systems change. How can public and private funders better support youth with lived experience in homelessness or foster care to take leadership roles in shaping the solutions funded on their behalf?
Amy, you're smarter than me, so I'll take this one so you don't show me up if that's okay. I'll jump in first. Justin Lee, Casey Family Programs, thanks everyone for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to have this important conversation. I'd lift up a few critical elements. One sort of category you can think of when we talk about leadership and centering lived experience, centering community, the folks that are closest to the challenges, is really equity. So how do we have equitable representation, equitable compensation, and equitable decision-making power, right? So often we'll set up listening groups or listening sessions or focus groups, or we'll have an advisory board of folks that are sort of segregated or separate. We'll extract that information. We'll take it back to people with titles like me and Amy and Kim, and we'll design or create the system, right? And I'd argue that that's not going to get you the best results. That's been status quo forever, and we've seen the results we've gotten, right? So how do you think about compensating folks for their time and expertise, really thinking about that representation in those decision-making circles and in those meetings so that those voices are not only heard, but they actually have the power that we all have as system partners with our fancy titles, right? So I think that's the one area to think about, invite you to consider. The other is putting that support in place for our lived expert and our community members that don't have 14 Zoom meetings a day like most of us do, right? That aren't used to being in these environments, in these meetings, in these work groups, et cetera, but they often, I've found, have the best ideas, right? And so how do we put in place supports, coaching, all that sort of behind the scenes work with the young people to really give them the best opportunity to make the biggest impact? And also, how do we design our tables in a way, let the youth and the young adults that are coming into these spaces actually design the tables themselves, and then we're kind of invited in, right? So how do we flip that paradigm, or that, again, that status quo that we've all sort of lived with? And I think when you take these approaches, you're really building equity and you're building ownership of the results. You're not only getting better outcomes, but I think you're going to see more sustainability because people are really invested. This is my thing. I'm a stockholder in this, right? And I want to see that return. So really would lift up those areas. And the other thing I'll just end on with respect to support, recently read a recent longitudinal study they did. They followed youth aging out of care who were, housing insecure. Over that year-long period, youth averaged 15 moves. So 15 moves in 1 year. So when you think about then, having a focus group even, or throwing somebody into the mix in a meeting or saying, give me your ideas, and I've moved 15 times over a year, there's support they're needed, there's coaching they're needed, there's resources needed, and I think we can all do better as a system in really lifting up those folks to put them in those positions of power. Amy, I'll turn it over to you.
That was so great, Justin. I would yes to everything Justin said. I think sort of to add on then to what he said, I think we have to consider what it looks like. To your point, if you have any individual who within a year has moved 15 times, it's going to be difficult, yeah, to have your computer ready for a meeting that starts right at 1 and where are you charging it and all of those things. And so it really is, it's on all of us to think of new ways that we can listen to people and get them to be involved. One of the things I've wanted to see, and I feel like I have seen with some of the youth tables, is not just the people who can get themselves maybe on a board. So we have to have boards like, you know, the emissary and other more formal places where we see youth who are paid to do this job, who maybe are, you know, ready at a time in their life for a 40-hour-a-week job and they're running this work, but just providing opportunities for other youth to use their voice, even if maybe they can only show up at a meeting once a month. And then there are other people who we hear from more regularly. So I think that's one thing that's important. And then the other thing I'll say is, at the county, I can speak, we have to do a better job of changing what we value through our job descriptions and the qualifications. This idea that someone who has some particular, and many people with lived experience, youth, will come in with a more classic degree, great, and maybe they'll be able to navigate a job at the county. But the fact that we miss so many valuable people because they may not meet, like they don't have a 4-year degree, makes no sense. And so changing what it is that we value, and we only do that by opening the doors for people with different experience, because we say your experience matters. You bring something to this table because you've experienced youth homelessness. I think that's where, yeah, that's the main thing I want to say. But again, I want to go back, like the funding that was restored for the youth. I mean, I can't overstate this enough. In all my years, I'm sure Justin, Kim, I've never seen a restoration like this from a proposed budget. This was restored at 100% of the expended rate last year. So although 7.1 had been funded in last year's Measure H, they were able to get back 5.6, which is what the system expended last year. So it's 100% of what you spent last year, you get to spend again this year. It only happened because it was youth and youth providers, yes, but the youth far outnumbered the providers, which I think was important. So yeah, it works. And the youth come with better ideas. Justin, I've been at many tables with Justin, and the room is all pontificating. And then like, there'll be a youth in the back that raises their hand and they just give like 3 sentences. There's the idea. But I'll be honest, the system kind of listens, everyone claps, and then we go back to the PowerPoint. And we still aren't doing a good job of like, let the people who know run the meeting and decide how we're going to build the program. We're still not great at that.
Thank you, Amy and Justin. It's very clear. We definitely need to elevate youth voices to be part and be decision makers at the table. This next question is for Yanni. Yanni, can you please share some of the biggest obstacles you face when accessing housing or finding a stable place to live as an unhoused youth?
Okay, hi, yes. So some of the biggest challenges I faced when on the search for stable housing was really the lack of affordable housing, and also, you know, the big wait that you have to do to even get into some of these places. Like there were times I applied to many places and I was just a little off on either the credit or the income requirement, and it resulted in a denial. And that's really discouraging for people who need a place to stay like as soon as possible. And even when I would apply to places that have like lotteries and things, and I would be like number 3,795, you know, and that's really unrealistic for someone who's been in a uncomfortable or unstable situation for a long time. And it's like, you know, really when am I gonna see the end of this? Like, type thing. So it's really just really difficult when you're in the situation to kind of see the upside, if that makes sense. I don't know. But yeah, hmm. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you, Yanni. I truly appreciate it. It is very clear. We need to continue to address the barriers and challenges that our unhoused youth face and need to navigate on a daily basis until they're stabilized. Thank you for your time. Kimberly, our next question is for you. What are some of the most effective strategies you've seen for building programs that not only meet the immediate needs of unhoused youth, but that also support youth not returning to adult homelessness and homeless chronicity? How do you balance innovation with the often restrictive nature of funding streams?
Thanks, Olga. I think that's a really important question, and there's a few pieces that are critical here. And I would add, as I kind of share some of these ideas, I want us to be real clear that a lot of this is how you end homelessness, period. Not just for youth. And the important piece of this is that including a youth voice is critical, but ending homelessness is about finding a permanent housing and having affordable housing for folks in our community. So in terms of designing programs that meet the need, I think in our community right now, first and foremost, we need really a crisis response system that addresses folks who are seeking shelter, who need immediate access to food, to benefits, to medical care, childcare, things like that, that we can respond to in real time as soon as a person is seeking that service. That is critical, but that is only the crisis response. What's also critical, and in many cases more important, is the long-term solution that address housing instability for people in our community. And that comes from building affordable housing, having subsidies that people can access in real time, having access to permanent supportive housing that come with the services that meet the needs of youth and youth who are aging into our adult system, who are having children of their own and ideally not entering our family system. Without those permanent long-term housing solutions, our crisis response becomes pretty diluted because the need cannot meet what's inflowing into our system. And so it's critical that as we think about designing services, with designing a system and funding a system, that we are focused on the immediate needs, but we're not losing sight of the back end, which is that permanent housing option for people who need it in real time. And that can look like us building permanent supportive housing with project-based vouchers. It can also look like resources that help folks enter the market rate units through subsidies. Other solutions are workforce development. As Amy mentioned, it's critical that we're advocating that for jobs that youth can enter without preconditions. Many of us had our first go at jobs without much experience, regardless of what degree you did or didn't have. And that's true for the folks that are entering our workforce today. I would add that universal basic income programs are a critical piece to all of this. Access to childcare is a critical piece to all of this. And benefits that actually serve the population here. If you are trying to get general relief as a resource, that's about $221 a month. That is not enough for any housing in LA. So in ensuring that we're looking at this from a holistic standpoint with long-term solutions attached, access to income, access to benefits, and ideally real permanent housing is the key to all of this.
Thank you, Kimberly. I appreciate your sharing your insight. The next question is for Justin. Justin, we know that young people with lived experience in homelessness or foster care cite job opportunities, mental health resources, and housing stability as some of their most pressing needs. From your perspective, working with KC family programs, would integrated funding models or cross-sector collaborations have the most promise for addressing these interconnected needs among unhoused youth?
Thanks, Olga. And I would just refer to Kim's answer that she just gave, right? I mean, I think it nails all the pieces. I think there's examples in Los Angeles, there's examples nationwide of where this is working, those partnerships. Happy to share more. We can send sort of summaries out after the webinar if that's helpful. I think just to think about it from a framework, one, I would say bringing the right people together at the table, and you know, the theme that we've been talking about here, centering those young people at the table. So letting them design it, being that leadership role of here's how we're going to design this housing support services, the actual housing itself, the criteria to get into the housing, to Yanni's point, right? What should this look like? What should the rules be, et cetera, et cetera. We don't want to be 3,701 on a waiting list, right? So thinking that piece through, and I think if you have again, the young people, the parents, whoever your sort of participant, quote unquote, target population is, leading the design, that's the first and foremost step, and everybody needs to sort of get around that. And then it's bringing in the business sector, the developers, the community-based organizations that the youth trust, and the youth say, these are the folks that I go to, faith-based organization, right? Philanthropy can play a role. I think what I'll say about philanthropy is that we are great at seeding innovation. We're great at filling in gaps where the county or bureaucracy, Amy, I saw your answer in the Q&A, which was perfect, right? Like bureaucracy moves slow. Bureaucracy, for me to write a contract and get it through my Casey family programs operating structure is a lot easier than for anybody at one of the county departments to write a contract and get it through their procedures, right? So we have more flexibility. We can seed innovation. We can, you know, sort of provide that general support, flexible, et cetera. However, we're never going to compete with government, right? So Casey Family Programs, as an example, we're an endowment. We're the largest national operating foundation. We're not a grant maker, but we're an operating foundation in the country that's focused solely on child welfare. Our endowment that has to last into perpetuity is $2.6 billion. The county's budget they put forward for next fiscal year, I think, is somewhere around 47 billion, right? So we're never going to be philanthropy is never going to be an option for long-term sustainability. It's not going to be an option for permanent housing or, you know, all these sorts of the areas that Kim lifted up. However, we can be in that space with a broader array of partners in figuring out what is that pathway to sustainability, and how can we make sure that we hold all of us accountable to being, you know, again, living in the shoes of our young people and saying, you have the decision-making power here. You're going to design something 100 times better than Kim, Amy, or I will. Yanni's going to knock it out of the park, right? And our ideas are going to be second to Yanni's. Yanni, I've only met right here on this panel, and I can already tell you, Yanni's going to do a better job than me. So I think that is a good model, bringing together the right players and then thinking creatively about funding structures and, you know, again, braiding and blending funding where you can, but again, putting the youth at the center of it. Because I always hate, and when I heard, Amy, the money that was left on the table that the system couldn't expend, that's what it was based off of then. And when you were kind of reinstating the money, how do we make sure that we're not leaving money on the table and that we're pushing those ideas with urgency and we're moving forward the really great designs that our young people have?
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate your response. The next question is for Yanni. Yanni, what are some of the things that you would want to be considered when designing a funding program for unhoused youth?
So when I think of funding, I would think that it needs to be flexible and easy to access. You know, not everybody's situation is the same. Every person, they have individual needs that needs to be met. So I would go as far as saying, you know, things not only just rent, but also like mental health support, you know, basics like hygiene products, clothes, cell phones, things of that nature, things that people might not have access to. I think that that's really important. Also, you know, making sure that people feel safe, I think is kind of like number one. So that's how I would go about funding. Yes.
Thank you, Yanni. That perspective you just provided for us is super valuable in shaping funding that truly encourages that we need to meet youth where they are. Justin and Amy, much of your work emphasizes shifting power to the community and redefining success through their lens. If we imagined a future 10 years from now where that shift has truly happened, where youth with lived experience are not just consulted, but are driving policy and funding decisions, what would surprise us most about how those systems now operate? And what do you think we'd realize we got wrong all along?
Okay, Justin, I'll do this one first, and then I want to hear from you too. I mean, I think what systems do, what bureaucracies do, is they, in some ways, they find the easiest way to do something, and then they expect people who will potentially use the programs or be enrolled in the programs to sort of fit into those programs. And so, you know, we can give a lot of specific examples. You know, I mean, I think the one that's in some ways most easy is to think about like a Department of Mental Health program. You know, we all know they're built in these a lot of times because of state funding or even federal laws. So they're built in these very regimented ways. And so I could be a mental health clinician and I go out and work with a person and I know all this person needs is, you know, me to fix their car or buy them boots, or, you know, it could be a million different things. But the way my program is designed, I have to do things in a very regimented way. And so I can offer this person things that they may not even want or need. They may take them when really all they wanted was X, but I'm not allowed to do X. And so I think that's what we would find, is that we would listen to youth. You know, I sit at tables, as I'm sure many of us have, and we all like, you know, people like myself who have, you know, who haven't experienced homelessness, who is a policymaker, and I'll throw out these ideas that I think are so great, and others will be like, oh, that's great. Oh, that's great. And you hear from a lot of times, you know, a person who has actually experienced homelessness or is a lot closer to the work of homelessness, and they'll raise their hand and they're like, that might sound good on paper or in some document, but that's not really going to help. What you need to do is this. And it's like, okay, so how do we take that? But that person says, this is what is needed, and then go back and put that into policy. And I think what sometimes I know I've been able to do a little better job of bringing back that information because the youth voices have done such an incredible job of educating so many of us. But then there are times I hit a funding wall. So maybe I can't build the program the way that I know it will be most impactful because it can't be funded that way. And that's when we're grateful when we have, you know, philanthropy or other, you know, other grant makers who can come and say, hey, okay, you want to try that thing, but none of the government funding will do it that way. We'll go fund it that way. Because that's what happens so often is we hear from a group, we are always like, you know, youth, speak up, tell us what you need. And you tell us what you need and we don't give it to you. We come back with something that isn't what you asked for. So I think if in a few years, if we genuinely had decision makers with this kind of experience that got to inform the policy design, well, one, we'd see reductions in homelessness because we would be offering solutions that actually worked, not just made us feel good or aligned with our funding streams. So those are my first thoughts. Justin?
Yeah, great thoughts. I mean, ditto to everything you shared. I think one thing that would be different if we truly made this transformational shift, one, you know, where Amy ended, we'd have better outcomes, clearly, right? I don't think you could argue that. I think something that doesn't get lifted up a lot, at least at the tables that I'm at, is a sense of urgency. So I think we would see more urgency to meet the immediate needs of folks and solve these crises. It's easy for me to look at my calendar and say, okay, I can't meet for another 3 weeks, right? I'm housed and comfortable, right? So I think that urgency piece and how do we act like this is, I've been in conversations in Los Angeles, and then I did my work, cut my teeth working with youth aging out of the system in Philadelphia. And the conversations I come into Los Angeles sometimes, because I've had that direct experience at 2 a.m. in a psychiatric hospital with a young person that's unhoused and is having a real traumatic sort of response to that. And I come into meetings and it's like, well, we can't do this, or we can only ask for this many housing vouchers, or this is a really tough problem, or let's come back a month and we're going to start 4 more work groups. That sort of the desperate nature of the being in the moment and living that experience versus policy, system, stakeholders, and how we approach it, I think there's too big of a gap there that we need to fix. And that's not throwing shade at anybody. I think it's just sort of a reality of how the system operates. And then finally, I think we'd have more accountability on our side, on the system side, writ large, because right now the accountability is all on the participants. When you look at the requirements to access housing and the paperwork and the hoops you have to jump through and the limited availability if you're struggling, experiencing poverty, compared to the accountability on the system side. If we don't return your call for 2 weeks, or if we give you the wrong information, or we give you outdated resources, there's not much accountability for the system in that scenario. So I think that is what we would see, and what would surprise us is, wow, when we can act with more urgency, hold ourselves accountable, and then also listen to those ideas and implement those ideas, roll up our sleeves with those powerful young people that know the right way and know the best design. Wow, look at this new system we got, right? Look at these outcomes that we're seeing, that we're just having an exponential return on our investment. So I hope we get there. I think we can get there. And I think it's a much better vision than where we are now.
Thank you, Justin and Amy. It's really inspiring to hear. We have 2 leaders that are strategizing and advocating solutions for unhoused youth. Appreciate it. I would like to open the last question for all of you to answer. From your experience working directly with youth or being a young person yourself, what gives you the most hope right now in the movement to end youth homelessness? And what message would you want funders and policymakers to take away from those stories?
I'm not a social worker by training, so I'm not good with reaching into the silence. So I'll jump in. I'll jump in first, but I'll be brief. I think I would lift up 2 things, or one thing, and then the response from funders and policymakers that we really need to think about. First, the wisdom, the knowledge, the experience, the inspiration, the resilience that we see in young people is exceptional, right? Just hearing, Yanni's story of, in the last 2 years, going from experiencing homelessness to all those different accomplishments, that I was like, that is overwhelming to me, right? So exceptional results. And when we resource folks appropriately, they're going to get those exceptional results on a system-wide level. They're going to go to scale, right? And so how do we resource folks appropriately? And I think what funders and policymakers need to understand is that we shouldn't expect those folks to be superheroes. We expect the population that's struggling the most. We expect small nonprofits that are often closest and have the best solutions to have big 5 accounting firms in order to get contracts or get grant funding, right? We expect the young people accessing the supportive services at, excuse me, at 18 or 19 to be fully developed, when their brains are still developing, and be fully, self-sufficient and ready to run their own household and all that other stuff. So I think we all need to understand the value of community-based lived experience and evidence as funders and as policymakers, and really structure the system around that, and stop expecting individuals and smaller organizations or community-based organizations to solve this problem, when it's going to take all of us.
I'll jump in next. So a couple things on that. I think as a person who experienced homelessness myself, the reality that our system is doing a lot to address the outcomes that of people who are already in our system is really positive. But I do think we need to be much, much better about addressing the inflow into our system. And I would say I am really hopeful that there's more dollars for prevention in our system today than there has ever been before. There's a lot that we can do with those prevention dollars if we're looking at good data, if we are leaning into the expertise of the community-based organizations who have been doing this work for a long time, if we're leaning into the expertise of folks who are currently experiencing housing crisis, those who have been couch surfing, those who know what it would take to stabilize their housing. The dollars are there, and how we shape them and use them is, we're at that point right now. And I think there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of, if we're thoughtful, we can have a really solid impact. The other thing I would add is that our system is getting a lot better about being holistic in nature. So leaning into multiple systems of care, thinking about both the health and mental health needs, but not only landing there, and also thinking about the preventative measures that we can tap into around employment, around, again, childcare, thinking about how we access and utilize entitlement programs to enhance our service delivery, to fund our service delivery, to make sure that the work we're doing is connecting dots, that doesn't leave our participants to seek out those programs and try and navigate multiple systems at the same time. Our work is starting to align better, and I'm really hopeful and see a lot of opportunity as we continue to push into that. While I'm very hopeful on that, I want to be realistic that there are a lot of variables outside of LA that are hindering that right now. The federal government and a lot of the executive orders that are coming out are not allowing us and will prevent us from being able to continue that work that we're doing locally around system alignment and around more preventative measures. And so it's really critical that we ensure our advocacy doesn't just stop here in the city and county of LA, but that we are taking it on a much higher scale, where cuts are happening beyond our control and where the focus has not been locally. So I'm hopeful, but want to be realistic about where we are today.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I'm like Kim. I'd like to find more hope when I look outside. I mean, if you look at the headlines, it's difficult to feel too much hope. When I feel hope is when I have the youth come to the office and we talk about their ideas for what can happen, often very mindful of funding cuts. They come up with really smart ideas about how we can move forward. I think I'd say, so that's where the hope is for me. It's when I actually talk to young people, I leave there feeling like, okay, we can maybe do something here. I would say when I think about funders and I think about myself, it's just to challenge any assumptions that I may have about the best way to help this population, because they're going to tell me what the best way is, and I have to put aside my own ego or what I think is right and really listen. And I'd also like to see a lot more opportunities for peer support. We talk about it all the time, but we just need to fund more opportunities. These are job opportunities for people who really want to be in this sector doing the work. And there's nothing like a peer who's experienced what you've experienced to help you, find the path that you want. I feel like peers do a much better job of listening to each other and actually trying to help a person to what they define as success for themselves. So that would be it.
Yanni, you're on mute if you're talking. I think you're taking us home.
Hey, okay. Let's see. I would just like to express my appreciation for the Village Family Services and, helping me tremendously. Like a year ago or 16 months ago, I never would have thought I would be where I am right now because, life was just hitting me hard in so many different ways. And being a part of this program really allowed me or gave me the access to put my energy into getting myself out of the situation, you know, and they've proven to be very, very, very helpful for me in a numerous amount of ways. And I would just like to say thank you to everybody on the TVFS family. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I want to let you know that it seems like the internet has gone down at the location where the rest of our team is. So, you know, I'd like to thank you so much to the panelists for your comments to the unhoused youth and for offering your insights. A special thank you to Yanni for your vulnerability and sharing your story and your critical perspectives and your leadership in the fight to end youth homelessness. I'd like to now invite community questions, and I'll go ahead and read some of those that we have gotten from some of our guests. The first question that we have from an anonymous attendee: how can providers make sure we don't miss funding or collaboration opportunities when they are being released in so many ways?
That's a great question. I mean, Amy, I don't know if you have an answer from the county side. I think from the philanthropic side, you've got Southern California Grant Makers, which is a membership organization of a ton of funders and philanthropy. So you might be able to go that route. And then I would, and there was a question also there in the chat from Chandler Jackson about, how do we get access to that early stage funding, or like, we just need to get that first grant because we're not established yet, or in that way, right? And I think I would lift up for everybody, relationships. Relationships are huge. And so to be able to start a relationship with someone or bring in partners together and talk about the work that you have there and the solutions that you have, I think relationship often drives, at least from my perspective, when I partner with organizations and provide funding, and again, as an operating foundation, we're working shoulder to shoulder. We have to be involved in the work in a substantive way because of our tax status. I'm going based off of relationship more than anything else, right? Of course, we're going to see results, and that has to be sort of foundational, but often I will partner based on relationship, based on word of mouth, who introduces me to this person, et cetera, like who I trust in the work, and then build that relationship further from there. So I would lift up, in addition to the sort of, I'm going after and submitting grants. I used to be a director of development and I ran a nonprofit, so I feel your pain. I think that relationship piece is really important so people can put a face with a name and understand your mission and your vision, and then go from there.
I'd like to add for the county, with the new county department, that this is one of the goals of the department, is helping make funding opportunities more accessible, more centralized. And I want to encourage everyone on this call to participate in the stakeholder engagement that will be happening as we're building out this new department. One of the groups that we've asked for very specific engagement with is people who don't currently receive government funding, or maybe are only subcontracted, or maybe have very small contracts. We want to make sure that we're really hearing from you, because that's how we're going to build our capacity with our new county department, is helping you figure out how to access these dollars. So look for those opportunities, and I'll be sure and send that to people at the village. So if y'all are on like a mailing list, and I'll share with them as well, we're building out a website where people can come and provide questions or get information about the next stakeholder engagement when those start this summer.
That's great. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Amy. I have another one here for us from Chandler Jackson. As a new nonprofit led by lived experience and rooted in comprehensive youth-centered housing model, we found it difficult to access early stage funding, especially without an existing site or large infrastructure. What advice would you give to organizations like mine that are ready to do the work, but need that first funder to say yes?
Yeah, that's Corey, that's the one I was referencing in my response about relationship and sort of building that out. But Kim, I'm assuming you've got some experience here and might have some good lessons to share.
Yeah, definitely happy to help kind of answer that. I think there's a few ways to agree with Amy and Justin in terms of really needing to think broadly about the service delivery in places where you can identify funding. Another strategy is to partner with an agency that does have the contract and seek to subcontract. LA Family Housing, as the lead service provider here in SPA 2, have done that with several agencies who now have built up the capacity to get past contracting thresholds and have enough experience in the work to be able to apply for direct contracts with different funders. We've been doing this for many years, and it has supported both the effort on the ground to ensure there's a variety of voices and a variety of agencies of multiple sizes doing the work. It also allows for a more regional approach. We recognize we can't be everywhere all the time, and we are not the best to serve every population. And so it allows us to lean into the expertise that different groups have, while also giving them the space to sort of try out the work and see if it's the right funding opportunity for them while we're supporting them with technical assistance. So I encourage you to reach out to the lead agencies within the coordinated entry system if the space that you're looking to get into is homeless services, and explore opportunities to subcontract different parts of a contract.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Amy. I'd like to invite Olga back on with us. We've come to the end of our Q&A session. But if she's not able to join us, oh, looks like here she is. I'd like to give her the opportunity to close this up for us.
Thank you so much, Corey. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Today's conversation reinforces how this work doesn't happen in isolation. Funding strategies thrive when we collaborate, elevate youth voices, and get creative together. This is how we build momentum. A huge thanks to our panelists and all of you for showing up for this conversation. Now, let's keep the momentum going. We are going to be having and hosting our second Youth Summit at CSUN on October 22nd. Tickets are currently on sale now. You can scan the QR code for more information. Once again, thank you for joining us and being part of this important work.
Thanks for having us.